today's webinar is about our iterative development process, and it's the process that we use for a lot of our projects, especially greenfields and big feature projects when we're working with our customers. Now, a good place to start with describing our process or methodology is to describe what it is not. A lot of people would be familiar with the Waterfall methodology. For a long time, the Waterfall was the gold standard of software development methodologies, and was the traditional method for developing a project. I believe in most software development circles it has fallen out of favor, at least in maybe not so much in enterprise, but definitely in the rest of the world. Waterfall is on the nose a bit because it has quite a few shortcomings. And we don't use it because of those shortcomings. Now, the Waterfall is characterized by doing a huge requirements analysis stage at the start before building the software. You go to great lengths to write extensive specification documents. A lot of that work is going to be done by a business analyst instead of a software developer. And once software development starts, the development is going to be done based on all those requirements documents and done in isolation away from your users. It's really the big bang approach to doing software development. With the waterfall cycle, it's got this slide describes the waterfall feedback cycle, where you build a project, you deliver all the features, and then you get the user feedback. And really, it's not really a cycle at all. The user feedback is coming in once they've got their hands on the software, right at the end, once everything's done and all the tools have been put away, and it's a bit late to incorporate any user feedback. So instead, we use Agile development because we don't like some of those limitations that Waterfall brings to the project. So Agile, for us, it means that we believe that ideas and requirements are going to change as products are developed and used by end users. And we value working code over extensive documentation. We like to deliver early and often, and that is to allow people to give us feedback on how the project is progressing and actually use the software to give feedback. And we want to spend a lot of time working with stakeholders throughout the whole process. We don't want to do a requirements analysis stage at the front. We want to do it as we're doing the actual development. When we come to develop a feature, that is the best time to find out exactly what the stakeholder is needing, and not at some far off time in the past. And we want the software developer to be doing that requirements analysis, not some other individual whose sole job is to gather requirements. It's best if the requirements analysis is done by the actual person doing the implementation. And the feedback cycle is a really important part of Agile, where we plan, we build, we deliver a small amount of functionality, get feedback on that functionality, and then we plan again and start delivering another set of features. And that's really important because it's going to help us to make sure that we're on the right track and developing software in the right direction, because often it is a bit experimental when you're developing a new piece of functionality or software, because nobody's ever done it before. You don't know what sort of reception it's going to get, and you might find that some of your core ideas are wrong. So we like to combine Agile with MVP development. And MVP is minimum viable product development. And if you haven't checked out our past webinars on MVP, I encourage you. Chloe can provide links to those recordings of those webinars that we've done in the past, where we describe what a minimum viable product is and how to identify features to go into your minimum viable product. I recommend you check them out if you haven't seen them already. But what it really means is that we want to build software in an iterative manner. We deliver an iteration, we release it to a set of users, a small set of users, and we deliver functionality that provides enough value to those users that they're going to start using the product. And then we build on top of that release and build more features and provide even more value in each subsequent release. And each subsequent release increases the potential target market. So we might start off with a very small subset of users because they've got the least demanding needs, and as we build out the features, we target more and more variety in our users. So I've talked about what an iteration, an iterative development. What is an iteration? Basically, it's a time box period where we can deliver a bundle of work of related features. So ideally, you want to keep your iterations quite short. 3 to 6 weeks is ideal. And at the end of that iteration, you want to be able to deliver some usable piece of software that's going to provide real value to end users. The reason we want to keep it quite short is that it's very difficult to plan these things too far in advance. As we've discussed, things change, requirements change, and users give feedback all the time. And if we try to plan out too big a block of work, by the time we get halfway through a big block of work, we might find that the ground is shifting underneath us. So it's important to keep it quite a short iteration. And that also helps with your estimation abilities. Estimations have the history of going wrong in software, and that's because it's very difficult to estimate accurately based on the limited information that you have at any one time. And so by keeping the iteration as nice and short, we make sure that we're not going to drift too far off our target. Now, the idea is that at the end of an iteration, we want to deliver usable and valuable software to the users. We don't want to deliver half-implemented features that can't be used. But at the same time, we need to find a balance where we're going to be not over-developing a feature. We don't want to spend a lot of time polishing a certain feature, because we might find that, well, when you're developing a new feature, it's new, and you're not really sure how it's going to be received by the users. So if you spend a huge amount of time developing a feature and making it perfect in your mind's eye, and then you find out that you've actually developed it a bit wrong, then that's going to be a lot of wasted time. So you really want to find that balance between perfection and usability and usefulness. So when we start the iterative process, we want to plan out an iteration, and that's where at reinteractive we get together with our project stakeholders, and so that's going to be the project owner, maybe some user representatives, some subject matter experts, and we discuss the goals of that iteration, and we're going to document those goals in what's known as an epic. Now, an epic it's really a way to describe a larger feature. So an example might be to say that it is a user sign-in flow. That's an example of an epic. Now, we describe it in an epic, but really you can break that down. You want to break that epic down into a number of different user stories, but it's important to identify a number of different epics at the start of the iteration, and then we can break them down as we're going forward. Now, it's important when we're planning an epic, or we're describing epics, we want to have quite a few epics in our iteration. We don't want to try to have a really small number of epics and dive really deep into that functionality. It's much better to do a shallow dive into a number of different pieces of functionality than dive deep into a few, because we want to be able to deliver software that is delivering value to our users. And an example might be, if we look at this user sign-in flow, if we said, oh, we're going to do the user sign-in flow to the nth degree in this iteration, and that's what we're going to concentrate on, and it's going to be a perfect user sign-in flow. And then at the end we deliver that functionality, and yes, the users can sign in really well and they love the sign-in flow, but when they get to the end of the sign-in flow, there's no actual software at the end. It's not going to provide any value to the users. So it's important to not just, we don't want to polish the heck out of one particular epic. Okay, so we've got our epics. We've got a number of different goals and targets for this iteration, and we take those epics and we break them down into user stories. And this is where we're getting into a bit more detail. and we want to break down each epic into really small chunks that we can estimate on. And here's an example of what a user story is. We want to describe who is acting, what is being achieved, and why we're doing it. So as a visitor, that is who's doing the acting in the story. I want to be prompted to log in if I try to access the product features. So that's what we want to achieve, and the reason we want to achieve it is because those features should only be accessible by paying users. And at this stage, we can just break down the stories and work with the stakeholders to nut out exactly what those stories are that we want to achieve, and we discuss them in quite a lot of depth, and we can document that in our project tracking system. And we will find that stories may get added or removed based on these discussions, and the idea is that we want to get enough idea of the functionality that we're going to be able to start estimating on how much effort's going to be put into that functionality. And that's important because of that time box period that we want to keep in mind. So what we do is we're going to assign points in our estimating, and the idea of points and calculating velocity, it's a whole subject on its own, and this is something we've covered in a past webinar, and actually it was our last webinar, so Chloe can provide a link to that webinar as well to learn more about how to use velocity and points to do your project planning. But what we'll do is we basically estimate our stories, put a value against them, and we decide whether or not it is going to fit within that iteration. And if we find that it's not going to fit in, then we might want to drop some stories out of that iteration. We might want to simplify some features so that they can fit within the iteration. But it's important to make sure that
Can I say something on this, James?
Yeah, go for it, Michael.
Yeah, one of the things about iterative planning that we run into a lot at Reinteractive, and I mean James will touch on it a bit more, is that this is probably the scariest part of iterative planning for the client, because this whole point of reorder and prioritize and remove is what really blows things up really with the client, because usually clients are trying to get everything done, right? So iterative planning, like James said earlier, iterative planning only works if you're also willing to do an MVP approach on your project and making sure that you can reduce stories and reduce scope to make sure that you get the best benefit out of what you're producing. There's also just a question here from James. He said, what's the idea behind Scrum and 2-week sprint compared to 3 to 6 weeks development? Really, in terms of your sprint and how long you're going to have it, James, it's really regarding your mix of resources and how much contact you have with the client and that sort of thing. What we tend to do is we'll have weekly sprint meetings where we go over what we're going to get done in the following week, because usually we're developing at such a high pace and the client is so engaged that we can get real work done every week. What James is more talking about with a 3 to 6 weeks of development is in that time attempting to produce a decent chunk of an MVP or a major set of epics that deliver a certain amount of functionality. So that 3 to 6 weeks development is there to sort of give a good idea to the client. Look, we are going to do 1 week sprints. We're going to do this weekly sprint meeting every week. We're going to do daily stand-ups. But over 3 to 6 weeks is when we're going to get functionality blah done, which could include 5, 10 different epics or whatever. But that's sort of like a block of work. We find that 2 weeks usually isn't enough for any decent sized project. So what we do is we say, look, it's going to be about 3 to 6 weeks depending on the complexity and how many people are on the project, and then we do the weekly sprint planning to get to that point. And that's where we would reorder, prioritize, estimate, and do all that sort of thing. Hope that answers your question, James, and if it doesn't, please answer another one. Okay, back to you, James McGrath, the other James.
All right, thank you, Michael. So yeah, we will take all those stories and we also reorder them. As Michael was saying, we're going to prioritize those stories based on what is the most important thing to get developed, and also what makes sense to develop first, because certain stories need to be developed before others if there's dependencies. As Michael was saying, and James was alluding to, we do weekly sprints. At the start of each week of an iteration, we're going to meet with the team and the stakeholders, and we're going to plan out what we're going to achieve that week. And there'll be a lot of discussion and planning in that meeting. And that happens at the start of the week. And then as we go forward, we have our daily stand-ups, and we will talk about, in each stand-up, we're going to talk about what we achieved the day before and what we're planning on achieving in the coming day. And in that way, we are constantly in contact. We want to have a lot of contact with the stakeholders, and it's a really important thing to have that daily stand-up so the stakeholders can gauge how things are progressing, and it gives them an opportunity to keep their finger on the pulse, and also decide on those priorities. Because if they're seeing things aren't progressing as quickly as we'd hoped, then it gives you an opportunity to either de-scope functionality or reprioritize functionality or simplify functionality, and it's really important to have that constant communication. And super important to have the project owner at those meetings. Now, as I mentioned, we are in constant communication throughout the whole process. It's not just doing our weekly stand-ups and daily stand-up meetings. We also want to be talking to either the product owner or the subject matter expert throughout the process. As we're developing each feature, the developer will be in contact with the person who knows about that feature and how it should work, and talking to them and talking through all the ins and outs of that feature. And we do use a number of different tools like Skype and a Flowdoc, which is like an instant messaging type application, so we have real-time chat with our customers. It's really important that we have that close contact with our customers, because they're the people who know the most about their business domain. They're the people who know what the software should be doing. And so we really want to get the ideas from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So our developers will work through each story and develop the story, and each story will have a life cycle that we can present in a tool. We use a particular tool called Pivotal Tracker, but there are lots of different tools that allow you to do this. And what we'll do is we'll invite the project owner and stakeholders into a project within that tool, and they can witness the life cycle of each of the stories. So as a developer starts working on a story, they're going to hit the start button, and when they finish the story, they'll hit finish. They'll get that code reviewed by another developer, and once that other developer is satisfied that it does the job correctly, then they're going to hit delivered. And then it flows over to the product owner to either accept or reject the story. And if the story is rejected, then it goes back to the developer, who can start working on the story again, or if it's accepted, then we can move on to the next story. And it's really important that the product owner has access to these tools, because it gives the product owner visibility of how things are progressing. They can see what the developers are working on at any one time and how things are progressing. So it's a really important piece of our communication with clients. As I mentioned, at the end of each story, when a developer finishes a story, they prepare the story to be either accepted or rejected. And what they will do is document inside the story how how the project owner is expected to test the story to verify that they've implemented that requirement or feature correctly. So an example might be, if the story was, as a user, I want to see a list of my favorite cinemas from which to select when I start my booking, you might see that to verify that story, the developer says, okay, log in to this URL with this username and password, click on book movie, you will see a list of your favorite cinemas in the right sidebar. And that makes it really easy for the stakeholder or the product owner to say, yes, that actually works, or no, it's not doing the job that I want it to do. Now, it's important to note here that we need to make sure that we do want to make sure that features work and work as expected, but we also want to be making sure that we don't want to be too pedantic about acceptance or rejection of stories. It's very okay to reject a story, but we encourage our project stakeholders to accept things that might not be implemented 100% the way that they want the story to be implemented. We always try to implement things as envisioned by the product owner, but if we do something slightly differently, then it's probably a good idea to say that yes, that feature is close enough and we can deliver it and put it in front of users and see what they think, because even though the product owner might think, oh, this is not the best way to do things, perhaps the users will prove otherwise. And it's good to get that information directly from the users instead of what our ideas are, because we've found in the past that often there are many different ways to achieve the goal, and sometimes the way that the product owner thinks it best achieved might not be this, they might not have agreement with the end users. And so this goes back to the point perfection is the enemy of good. You can try to get perfection in software, and you can do it, but it takes a long time. And so we want to deliver something that is good rather than perfect, because you can deliver something that is good in much less time than it takes to deliver something that is perfect. And we've found that if you keep going back and revisiting features over and over and over again and trying to perfect them, it's often a way to derail a project, because it takes such a long time and you start ignoring other more important features. You might think, oh yes, this is something that is important to get right. We definitely need this feature to behave in this manner, but is it a higher priority to make those changes to make it act in that manner, or is something else higher priority on your list? And that's something that a project owner really needs to keep in mind when they're deciding to accept and reject a story. So once we get to the end of an iteration, we're going to have a lot of delivered stories that have been accepted, and ideally we're delivering software out to real users, not just at the end of the iteration, but throughout the iteration. So we'll have a staging server where we'll deliver software for people to be testing on, and then we'll deliver it out to production. And ideally, we will be releasing software all the time throughout the iteration. We don't have to always wait. Maybe in the first iteration, you're not going to be able to deliver much to a production system because there's not a whole cohesive piece of software for quite a while at the start. But once you've got past your first iteration, you'll be delivering all the time to production and getting feedback literally in almost real time from your users. And basically, once we've finished an iteration, we start planning for the next one. We actually plan before we finish the first end of the iteration. We start planning for the next one, and basically we just keep on doing those iterations until we've decided that we have provided enough functionality to the users. And each iteration, we're going to learn a lot from our users, and so that's going to really influence the plan for the next iteration. And that's really key, that we want to be dynamic in our iteration plan.
One of the things that James touched on before about accepting something that's close enough, this is a hairy topic for consulting companies, especially development shops, because the client might feel that we're trying to just get out of the work, or we're trying to dodge, not quite deliver what's wanted or something like that. That's definitely not the case. Usually what happens in that sort of environment is that the client will ask for a certain type of functionality. Our team will go and deliver that to the way they believe it should be working, because they've probably done this more often than the client in many cases, not all cases, but fairly often. They have a bit more experience on how to implement something like this. And then it'll be implemented, and it will achieve the feature request from the client, and it'll do what the story was all about, and this is what it should do, and yes, they can sign up and all that sort of thing. What can throw it off the rails and really delay a project is that, you know, say the sign-up process allows you to sign up, goes to a second page where you enter your details and then lets you log in, right? A client who could cause the project to go a bit longer there might want all of that sign-up stuff to happen on the front page in one window and look really snazzy. Now that's fine, and there's no problem with developing that. However, it's better to do those sorts of progressive enhancements, or enhancements to the basic working functionality of the system towards the end of the project, when you've got the key portion of the project done. So the sign-up flow, for example, yes, it could be made a lot simpler. Yes, we can make it better. Yes, we could use that color blue instead of this color blue. Yes, we could do all these sorts of things and make it a one-page thing that even calls you back and all that sort of stuff. But if that's not critical to the process, then really it should be pushed back as far as possible, because you can spend a whole week just playing around with different aspects of that, and that's just a week of development gone. You'd be much better off focusing on the key differentiating aspects of your project than, you know, trying to tweak the sign-up form to perfection. Because if you don't have any sign-ups, then you don't even know what perfection would be, because you haven't been able to do any testing. You know, maybe your users are a certain type that they expect everything to be one page after the next after the next. Or perhaps they're a different market and they expect it all to be in one window and have a nice, you know, SMS verification or something. So there's a lot of things there. The most important thing is focus on what's good enough to get you launched, so that we free up time to deliver what's actually super important to your project. And if we can do it that way, then we get more done, and you know, everyone's happy because we get the project launched earlier. It can generate income earlier, and by generating income earlier, the client earns more money and they can engage with us again. Thanks, James.
No worries. So what does all this learning mean? It means that we're going to have a more complex planning process. It means that we're going to have to be incorporating all that learning we've done in previous iterations into our subsequent iterations. And it does make it more difficult. We are going to have to make tough decisions about removing or adding functionality or simplification of functionality. We start off with our entire scope of our project quite unclear, but as each subsequent iteration is completed, we're learning more and more for our users, and we're going to learn so much that our plans for the future are going to become clearer and clearer as we go along. It does mean that the total scope of the project is somewhat fuzzy at the start. We can estimate on what we expect is going to happen. We do recognize that things will change as the project continues. We can give ballpark figures, of course, but as each iteration develops, we learn more and more. We're going to find out a lot about where this project's headed. And that uncertainty is a bit scary, but it's better to embrace that uncertainty than to try to ignore it, because if you ignore it, it's going to bite you at the end. In conclusion, iterative development is not as simple as Waterfall, but it is more realistic to deal with that change that we need to embrace. And it is much more realistic because we're working closely with our users through working software instead of trying to get them to imagine what it's going to be. And it gives us the best chance that we're going to have to learn lessons early and to adjust to those those lessons as we move forward and gain knowledge at every step. And by gaining knowledge, we're going to have a much better result at the end. We're going to be much more likely to deliver a product that actually the users actually want to use rather than what we think they're going to use, which are often two very different things.